He told her she didn't deserve a single second of his time, but 5 years later, the millionaire CEO fell to his knees, because the 3 little girls beside her had his eyes. Carter Wallace's words echoed through the office long after they left his mouth, sharp enough to leave the air trembling. Hannah stood frozen, her fingers clutching the folder she had brought him, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. His voice, usually calm, smooth, controlled, had risen with a force that stunned her. "You don't deserve my time," he had shouted, each word landing with the precision of a blow he didn't even realize he was delivering. His dark brown eyes she once thought held warmth, now looked at her like she was a meaningless disruption in the path of his rising empire. He stood behind his massive desk, posture rigid, jaw clenched, a man completely consumed by the world he had built. She knew he carried stress. She knew his business consumed him. But she never imagined he could turn that sharpness on her with such cruel indifference, slicing through months of shared glances and unspoken connection as if none of it ever existed. Hannah tried to steady her breathing, but each inhalation burned. She had come to tell him she was leaving her position at the company, hoping for a conversation, maybe even a hint of the man she thought she saw beneath the polished CEO exterior. Instead, he threw the words at her like she was nothing. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but her voice refused to form, trapped under the weight of shock and humiliation. She wasn't angry yet, the anger would come later. Now there was only disbelief, how effortlessly he dismissed her, how easily he erased the closeness she had felt, how foolish she suddenly realized she had been. She wondered if she had simply invented every soft moment between them, every smile that lingered too long, every conversation where his guard seemed to drop. Maybe she had imagined it all. Maybe he truly felt nothing. A silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Carter finally turned away, as if the conversation had already ended in his mind. He reached for his phone, ignoring her entirely. The dismissal was worse than the words themselves. She felt something inside her crumble, something she didn't know how to rebuild. She lowered her gaze, blinking hard as her vision blurred, fighting the sting of tears she refused to let fall in front of him. Without another word, she placed the folder on the edge of his desk. The soft sound it made seemed deafening in the quiet room. Then Hannah walked out, each step careful and steady even though her chest ached. Her hand trembled when she pushed open the office door, the corridor suddenly feeling colder, emptier, like the world she had known here had vanished in the span of a single sentence. She didn't remember the elevator ride. She didn't remember crossing the lobby. She only remembered the sharp night air hitting her lungs as she stepped outside. It felt like waking from a dream, one she didn't realize had become a nightmare until the moment he tore it apart. When she reached her small apartment, the broken pieces inside her finally surfaced. She sank onto the bed, burying her face in her hands, letting the tears fall freely now, each sob shaking through her. She replayed his words, unable to soften them, unable to twist them into something less painful. "You don't deserve my time." It echoed again and again in her mind, the final blow to any hope she secretly carried. But as the hours passed, the grief transformed. A quiet resolve began to form inside her. She didn't deserve his time. Maybe not. But she deserved better than this. She deserved a life where her worth wasn't measured by the attention of a man who didn't see her value. That night, she made the decision to leave. Not just the job. Not just the city. Everything. She packed the essentials into a single suitcase with trembling hands, unsure where she was going but absolutely certain she wasn't staying here. She was done chasing someone who couldn't offer her more than coldness and cruelty. She was done hoping for warmth from a man incapable of giving it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that she wasn't leaving alone. That life had already begun to shift inside her, quietly, unexpectedly, altering her future in ways neither she nor Carter could foresee. As she locked the door behind her and stepped out into the darkness of a new beginning, she carried with her the first faint signs of a secret that would, 5 years later, bring the mighty Carter Wallace to his knees. Hannah woke the next morning feeling as if she hadn't slept at all, her body heavy with exhaustion and her mind spinning with the remnants of last night's pain. She moved through her small apartment like someone trapped in a fog, picking up clothes, folding blankets, running water for coffee she didn't intend to drink. Every action felt mechanical, disconnected from the storm churning inside her. She tried to tell herself she had done the right thing by leaving. She tried to convince herself that cutting Carter out of her life was a step toward self-preservation. But no matter how many times she repeated it, her chest still felt bruised, as if his words were carved into her ribs. The nausea hit a few hours later, sudden and sharp. She barely made it to the bathroom in time. When it passed, she sat back against the wall, breathing heavily, confused. She hadn't eaten anything strange, and stress had never affected her like this before. A strange sense of déjà vu crept through her, accompanied by a wave of unease she couldn't quite explain. When the nausea returned the next morning, and the morning after that, she found herself staring at the small calendar pinned to her refrigerator. The dates she traced with her fingertips told a story she wasn't ready to hear. Still, she walked to the drugstore, her stomach twisting with every step, and bought a single pregnancy test. She told herself it was only to rule out the possibility, to calm her anxiety, to get her body under control. She told herself there was no reason to be nervous, that nothing in her life could change more than it already had. But her hands shook as she opened the box, and her breath stilled when she waited for the result. 2 lines. Bold. Clear. Immediate. Her vision blurred. She felt the world tilt slightly, and her knees pressed into the cold tile floor as she tried to steady herself. Pregnancy hadn't been in any of her plans, not now, not alone, not after fleeing a man who had made it painfully obvious how little she meant to him. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, trying to ground herself as a dozen frantic thoughts collided in her mind. She imagined Carter's expression if he were here now, the disdain, the irritation, the dismissive wave of his hand. The memory of his voice echoed so sharply that she flinched. "You don't deserve my time." No. She wouldn't go back. She wouldn't tell him. She wouldn't allow the child inside her to ever feel unwanted or insignificant. And she certainly wouldn't expose her baby to a man capable of such cruelty. The next few weeks were a blur of decisions she never imagined making alone. Hannah resigned officially, packed everything she owned into her car, and drove away from the city without telling a single soul. She found a small rental house in a quiet town, a place where no one knew her past, where she could rebuild without the shadow of a man who had torn her apart. She found work in a small cafe first, then later in a little boutique where the hours were manageable and the atmosphere calm enough to keep her nerves steady. Her pregnancy wasn't easy. She faced it without family nearby, without a partner to steady her, without late-night reassurance from someone who loved her. She read parenting books, took notes at every doctor's appointment, and budgeted carefully, learning how to stretch each dollar while preparing for 3 babies she didn't yet know were on the way. By the 4th month, the doctor smiled gently at the swirling images on the ultrasound screen and told her, in the softest voice she had ever heard, that she wasn't carrying 1 life, she was carrying 3. For a moment, she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by a surge of fear and awe that tangled together in her chest. But when she saw those tiny forms moving, 3 heartbeats, 3 futures, 3 souls, something inside her shifted permanently. She was terrified, yes, but she was also filled with a love so powerful it made her eyes burn. She would do this. She would protect them. She would give them a childhood full of warmth and safety and belonging. She would become the anchor they needed, even if she had to do it alone. The months that followed tested her more deeply than anything she had ever endured. Pregnancy with multiples was exhausting, sometimes frightening, and always demanding. But with every kick, every flutter, every doctor's appointment confirming that all three girls were healthy, Hannah felt a growing determination. She felt stronger than she ever had. Stronger than Carter had ever made her feel. When the day finally came and she held her newborn daughters, Amber, Macy, and Laurel, against her chest, she cried in a way she hadn't since the night she left the city. But these tears were different. They were full of love and relief and gratitude. She had created something beautiful out of the ashes of her heartbreak. She didn't think about Carter again that night. She didn't let his voice haunt her. She didn't imagine what he would have said or how he would have reacted. Instead, she looked at the three tiny faces nestled against her, their identical brown eyes blinking up at her with innocent trust, and she whispered a promise only they would ever hear. "You will always deserve my time. And you will always deserve love." She didn't know yet that one day, 5 years later, the man who once denied her worth would see these girls and realize he had lost more than he ever understood. She didn't know that he would come to regret every word he said. All she knew was that her new life had begun. And she would never let anyone take it away. Carter Wallace never realized how quickly 5 years could disappear when a man buried himself so deeply in work that he forgot how to live. In the beginning, he convinced himself he was fine, that pushing Hannah away had been necessary, that she had been a distraction he couldn't afford during the most crucial period of his expanding empire. He had told himself she was unimportant, that she would have slowed him down, that she didn't deserve his time. He repeated those lies so many times that they eventually numbed the ache he refused to acknowledge. But numbness has a way of decaying into something darker, and Carter never saw that shift coming until it had already swallowed him whole. His company grew exponentially. His board celebrated him, investors worshipped him, the press adored the polished image of a young CEO who never missed a step. He worked 12-hour days, traveled non-stop, slept in hotels more than his penthouse. He made deals worth millions, expanded globally, and became the man his father never believed he could be. On paper, he was everything he had ever wanted to become. In reality, something vital inside him had hardened into stone. It started subtly, the way he stopped laughing at things that used to amuse him, the way he snapped at his assistant for minor mistakes, the way he stopped noticing when people complimented him. His mother proudly spoke of his success to anyone who would listen, but when she asked him to visit for holidays, he always refused, claiming work obligations. Even in the quiet of his home, he paced through rooms like a ghost drifting through his own life. One night, as he sat alone in his office long after everyone had left, he found himself staring at the large windows overlooking the city. The lights glittered beautifully, but they no longer comforted him. The skyline that once inspired ambition now felt like a wall, trapping him in 1,000 expectations he had built for himself. He wondered when exactly life began to feel so empty, when exactly conversations became shallow, when exactly he stopped feeling anything at all. He blamed stress. He blamed long hours. He blamed the demands of success. But the truth was much simpler and infinitely more painful. The moment he yelled at Hannah 5 years ago was the moment a part of him fractured. He had tried to ignore it, bury it under achievements and luxury, but he couldn't outrun the consequence of breaking something he didn't understand he needed. His memories of Hannah surfaced in the quiet moments, the curve of her smile, the softness of her laugh, the way she brought calm without effort. Sometimes he dreamed about her by accident and woke up angry, because the dreams felt too real and the emptiness afterward too sharp. He tried dating, but every attempt fell flat. No one held his interest past the first dinner. No one felt familiar the way she did. No one challenged him or understood him or soothed the chaotic edges swirling inside him. He started noticing small things that reminded him of her, a stray blonde hair on an old sweater she once borrowed, a coffee mug she bought and left in his office cabinet, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in the back seat of his car far longer than it should have. He threw none of it away. He didn't know why. Maybe he wanted reminders, maybe he wanted to torment himself, maybe he simply couldn't admit out loud that he missed her. 5 years later, his life looked perfect from every angle, but perfection without meaning quickly turned to rot. He found himself restless, irritable, dissatisfied with accomplishments he once would have celebrated. His team noticed the shift. His friends noticed the distance. Even his board, composed of stoic professionals, noticed the cracks forming in their unstoppable CEO. But Carter dismissed every concern and continued driving himself harder, as if more work might fill the hollow space growing inside him. The breaking point came unexpectedly. His investor arranged a meeting in a small town several hours away, insisting it was crucial for an upcoming partnership. Carter begrudgingly agreed, annoyed by the inconvenience. He didn't know why the location was so remote, or why the partner chose a bookstore of all places for the meeting. But he went anyway, unaware he was walking headfirst into the most life-altering moment he would ever experience. As he drove toward the town, the countryside stretched out in rolling hills, quiet roads, and a slower pace that irritated him at first. But then something strange happened. He began to relax. The silence unnerved him, but it also grounded him in a way he hadn't felt in years. By the time he pulled into the small parking lot of a cozy bookstore, he felt strangely exposed, as if the calm atmosphere peeled back layers he had spent years fortifying. He stepped inside, expecting to meet the investor immediately. Instead, he saw her. Hannah. Standing behind the counter, sunlight from the window haloing her blonde hair, her blue eyes focused on the children's books she was arranging. She looked older, softer, more beautiful than he remembered. Her face held a quiet confidence, a peace he had never seen in her before, that he had never given her the chance to find. For a moment, Carter forgot how to breathe. His heart pounded so violently that he gripped the nearest shelf for stability. But then he noticed something else. 3 little girls giggled and ran around her, 3 identical children with brown hair and warm brown eyes, the same eyes staring at him from mirrors his entire life. Recognition struck him like lightning, crackling through every nerve in his body. He felt his lungs collapse, his pulse stutter, his mind go blank. It was impossible to deny what he saw, impossible to rationalize it away. The girls weren't just familiar. They were his. Carter had spent 5 years punishing himself with numbness, 5 years pretending he didn't regret chasing her away, 5 years convincing himself he didn't deserve the ache inside him. But in that bookstore, staring at those 3 little faces, he realized he hadn't just lost Hannah. He had lost an entire family. 3 daughters. 5 years of their lives. First words, first steps, first birthdays, first everything. The weight of that truth crushed him, hollowing him out with a grief so overwhelming he had to steady himself to keep from falling. For the first time in his life, Carter Wallace, the man who believed he owed no one anything, felt shame so deep it shook him to his core. What he didn't know yet was that this moment was only the beginning. Fate was not done with him. Not even close. Hannah didn't notice Carter at first. She was busy wiping down a small table near the children's corner, humming softly under her breath as the girls played nearby. Amber tried to stack books taller than herself, Macy twirled in circles like a tiny whirlwind, and Laurel inspected the potted plant by the window with all the seriousness of a botanist. They filled the store with life and warmth, and Hannah's smile, soft, effortless, completely unaware, reflected a peace she had earned through years of struggle. Carter stood motionless near the doorway, unable to move or speak. His heart pounded so violently that he wondered if anyone else could hear it. His breath had lodged somewhere in his chest, making every inhale feel jagged. He had imagined running into Hannah someday, maybe by chance, maybe through a mutual friend, but nothing in his mind had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for the sight of 3 children who carried his features so unmistakably it felt like a punch to the stomach. He watched as Hannah leaned down to tie Amber's shoelace, her blonde hair slipping over her shoulder, her blue eyes bright with affection. She murmured something that made the little girl giggle, and Carter felt something inside him break. That gentle tone, that soft smile, that warmth, he had thrown all of it away years ago without understanding what he was losing. And now he stood here, an outsider, watching a scene that should have been his everyday life. It was Laurel who noticed him first. She stood up from her crouch near the plant, clutching a leaf in her hand, and stared at him with wide brown eyes. Her gaze was curious, steady, and far too intelligent for her age. She tilted her head, exactly the way he did when assessing someone. His lungs squeezed painfully. "Mama," Laurel said softly, pointing toward him. "There's someone here." Hannah lifted her head, expecting a customer. The moment her eyes landed on Carter, she stiffened visibly, as if every nerve in her body locked into place. Her expression froze into something between disbelief and dread. Her hand automatically reached for her daughters, pulling them closer without thinking. Carter tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. He took a small step forward, but stopped when he saw fear flash across Hannah's face. It wasn't fear of him hurting her, it was fear of him hurting the 3 little lives she was shielding with her entire being. "Hannah." He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, cracked with shock. One word, and 5 years of silence collapsed into it. She swallowed hard, her gaze sharp and guarded. "What are you doing here?" Her voice wasn't angry, it was terrified, as if she feared he had come to rip apart the safe world she built. He shook his head helplessly. I didn't know. I didn't know you were here. I didn't know." He couldn't finish. His eyes drifted to the girls again. Each one of them. The identical brown hair, the familiar eyes, the shape of their noses, the curve of their eyebrows. There was no denying it, no matter how desperately he wanted to cling to logic. Hannah followed his gaze, her jaw tightening. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't look at them like that." "Like what?" His voice broke, raw and desperate. "Like you suddenly care." The words hit him harder than her leaving ever had. He winced, almost physically recoiling. But he forced himself to stay still, to face her, to face the consequences he deserved. The girls were staring now, unsure who this stranger was or why their mother's voice trembled. Amber stepped closer to Hannah, gripping the hem of her shirt. Macy hid partially behind her sister. Laurel continued watching him, analyzing him with quiet intensity. He lowered himself to kneel, not wanting to tower over them, not wanting to look imposing, trying to convince himself that if he made himself small enough, maybe he wouldn't scare them. "Hannah." He tried again. "Please tell me. Are they?" She closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, tears shimmered there, beautiful, painful, furious tears. "Yes," she whispered. "They're yours." Carter felt his entire world collapse under the weight of that truth. His knees weakened, his breath shook violently, and his vision blurred. He pressed a hand to the floor to steady himself. He couldn't speak. He couldn't think. All he could do was stare at the 3 children he had never met, 5 years of their lives gone, stolen by his own arrogance, his own cruelty, his own blindness. Hannah's voice trembled when she continued. "I left because you made it crystal clear what my worth was to you. You said I didn't deserve your time. So tell me, Carter, why would I let you decide the worth of my daughters?" He squeezed his eyes shut, shame rising like fire in his throat. "Hannah. I was wrong. I was so far beyond wrong I can't even. You were cruel. You were careless. You were dangerous." She didn't say those words out loud, but they rang in the silence between them. He opened his eyes again, looking at her, at the girls, trying to find air while drowning in guilt. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her expression hardened. "Because I didn't want them to grow up believing your approval determined their value. I wasn't going to let you treat them the way you treated me. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to collapse at her feet and beg for forgiveness. But none of that mattered. None of it was enough. Nothing he could say would erase the fact that he had missed 5 years of their lives, first steps, first words, first everything. A small hand tugged on Hannah's sleeve. Laurel looked up at her mother, then at Carter again. "Mama, who is he?" Hannah inhaled sharply, her eyes burning. For a moment, she looked at Carter with a question he didn't deserve to answer. Should she tell them? Should she shield them? Should she wait? The silence stretched until Carter felt his heart shatter under the weight of anticipation. He whispered, barely audible, "Please, let me meet them." Hannah didn't answer immediately. Her breath shook. Her eyes closed. She knelt and hugged all 3 girls tightly, as if drawing strength from them. When she finally stood again, she was trembling. With a guarded, trembling voice, she said, 5 minutes. Outside. That's all. Carter nodded, unable to speak. 5 minutes. The first 5 minutes he would ever have with the daughters he never knew existed. He followed her out of the store with his heart in fragments, knowing that everything after this moment would depend on whether he could prove, to her and to the girls, that he had become a different man than the one who once believed she didn't deserve his time. Hannah led the girls outside with a stiffness in her shoulders that told Carter she was holding herself together by sheer will alone. The sun was bright, casting soft shadows across the small courtyard behind the bookstore, where a few benches stood beneath the shade of an old oak tree. The girls clustered close to their mother, sensing the tension without understanding it. Carter followed at a respectful distance, afraid that if he stepped too close or spoke too quickly, he might shatter whatever fragile permission she'd just granted him. 5 minutes. It was more than he deserved, yet nowhere near enough for the storm of emotions clawing through him. When they reached the bench, Hannah knelt in front of her daughters, brushing hair from their faces and whispering something too quiet for him to hear. The girls nodded uncertainly. Their small hands clutched the hem of her blouse, their eyes wide with confusion. Carter stood a few feet away, feeling every beat of his heart like a blow to his ribs. He knew he looked terrified. He didn't care. His world had narrowed to 3 tiny faces and the woman he had driven away. Finally, Hannah rose. Her voice was steady, but her jaw trembled when she said, "Girls, this is Carter. He used to be someone I knew." It wasn't the introduction he dreamed of. It was distant, guarded, stitched with pain. But he couldn't blame her. She was trying to protect them. Protect herself. And yet she hadn't denied him. She hadn't pushed him away. She was giving him a chance, a small one, but still a chance. The girls looked at him curiously. Amber, the boldest, stepped forward first, studying him with the cautious bravery of a child. Macy hung back behind her sister, peeking around her shoulder. Laurel watched him with unnerving intensity, her expression thoughtful in a way far too mature for her age. Carter knelt to their level, lowering himself until he was sitting on the ground rather than towering over them. He placed his hands on his knees, palms up, showing he wasn't a threat. It felt like his entire soul had folded into that simple gesture. "Hi," he whispered, unsure whether his voice would hold. I'm Carter." Amber tilted her head. "Why do you look like us?" she asked bluntly, as only a child could. His breath hitched. Hannah inhaled sharply behind the girls, but she didn't interrupt. Carter swallowed hard. Because. He forced himself to look each of them in the eyes, even though the truth burned. "Because I'm your father." The air seemed to hold still. The girls blinked at him, their expressions shifting from confusion to surprise to fascination. Macy stepped out from behind Amber, staring at him as if trying to solve a puzzle. Laurel stayed silent, but the intensity of her gaze only grew. "Father?" Amber repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. "Like a dad?" "Yes." His voice cracked. "Like a dad." Macy frowned slightly. "Where were you?" The question was innocent, not accusatory. But it pierced him deeper than any accusation ever could. Carter's throat thickened. "I didn't know," he said gently. "I didn't know about you. If I had, I would have come. I would have been here. I promise you that." They exchanged glances, tiny silent conversations happening between the three of them. Children were perceptive in ways adults often forgot. They sensed sincerity. They sensed fear. They sensed truth. And they were sensing all of that now. Laurel finally stepped closer, her small shoes crunching lightly on the gravel. She reached out and touched Carter's face, her fingers brushing the stubble on his jaw. The contact nearly undid him. His eyes stung with tears he struggled to keep from falling. Laurel studied him quietly, her brows knitted. "You're real," she murmured. A choked laugh escaped him. "I am." Amber moved closer too, curiosity blooming into something warmer. "Do you know how to read stories?" "Yes," he answered quickly, almost desperately. "I can learn any story you like." Macy bit her lip, then shuffled forward with timid hope. "Do you know how to do braids?" Carter swallowed. "Not yet. But I can learn. I want to learn." Laurel looked back at her sisters, then at him again. "Can we show him our drawings?" The question felt like a lifeline thrown into his hands. "I would love that. More than anything." Hannah's breath caught, and when Carter looked up at her, he saw tears shining in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, but it was too late. He had seen the conflict, the love, the fear, the longing she had tried so hard to bury. She cleared her throat and said gently, "Girls, you can show him 3 pictures. Then it's time to go home." "3 each?" Amber asked hopefully. "3 total," Hannah said, trying to maintain control of the moment. Amber pouted, but Laurel grabbed her hand and nodded firmly, accepting the rules. Macy tugged on Carter's sleeve and motioned him toward the small bench. They climbed onto it beside him, the 3 little bodies crowding close, their drawings spread out like treasured secrets. Carter listened to every explanation, asked questions, pointed at details with genuine interest. He didn't have to pretend. The fascination was real. The awe was real. The regret was real. And the love blooming inside him, sudden, overwhelming, absolute, was the most real thing he had ever felt. Hannah watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, her heart caught somewhere between breaking and healing. She wasn't ready to trust him. She wasn't ready to forgive him. But seeing him kneeling on the ground, letting 3 tiny girls climb him like a jungle gym while he hung on their every word, she couldn't deny that he was trying. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder whether the man who once shouted she didn't deserve his time might now spend the rest of his life trying to prove he'd been wrong. Carter returned the next day, and the day after that, and soon it became impossible to tell whether he came because he wanted to see the girls or because he needed to see them. In truth, both were equally real. He always texted first, careful, tentative, knowing he had no right to walk into their lives without permission. Sometimes Hannah ignored the message, and those days felt like punishment he fully deserved. But on the morning she answered with a short, cautious yes, he drove to Snow Haven faster than he would ever admit, his heart pounding with a mix of fear, hope, and something deeper he didn't dare name yet. He arrived early every time, even when she told him not to rush. He parked across the street or waited near the park, scanning the sidewalk for the first glimpse of small brown ponytails bouncing like tiny springs. The moment he saw them, 3 little whirlwinds running toward the playground, chattering in their musical voices, his chest tightened with a warmth so intense it bordered on pain. He'd never felt something both beautiful and agonizing at once, something that made him rethink every moment of his life before them. The girls welcomed him faster than he expected. Children rarely held grudges for sins they never saw, and they didn't know the cruel sentence their father had once thrown at their mother. To them, he was new, unfamiliar, exciting. Amber often ran up to him first, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward whatever adventure she'd decided on for the day. Macy was quieter but affectionate in her own way, slipping her small hand into his whenever she got tired of running. Laurel stayed the most observant, studying him carefully, watching how he reacted to her sisters, how he treated their mother, how he handled small disappointments. When Laurel finally trusted him enough to climb into his lap on her own, it felt like receiving a medal he hadn't earned but would protect at all costs. Hannah remained cautious but present. She watched their interactions from a distance or a nearby bench, her arms often crossed, her guard always up. Yet she never stepped in unless necessary. She didn't interrupt when Carter knelt in the grass helping the girls build castles out of sticks and stones. She didn't intervene when he taught them how to skip rocks across the pond, even though he was terrible at it and the girls teased him mercilessly. She let him learn them. She let him try. The turning point came one afternoon at the small town playground. The sun hung low in the sky, turning everything golden. Hannah sat on a bench near the slide while Carter pushed the girls on the swings. Amber wanted to go higher, Macy wanted him to count her swings out loud, and Laurel insisted on timing each push to an invisible rhythm only she understood. Carter managed all three, his face flushed from effort and laughter. When the girls finally grew tired, they ran off to collect rocks and pine cones, leaving Hannah and Carter alone for the first time that day. He walked over, breathing hard and smiling in a way she hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. She tried not to look affected, but he seemed to notice anyway. "You're good with them," she said quietly, not looking directly at him. He sat on the far side of the bench, giving her space. "I'm trying." She hesitated, then asked, "Why now?" He exhaled slowly. "Because 5 years ago, I was an idiot. Because I didn't know what mattered. Because I didn't know about them." His voice grew softer. "Because I didn't know what I threw away." The words hung between them, heavy and painful. She didn't look at him. "That doesn't change what happened, Carter." "No," he murmured. "It doesn't. And I won't ask you to pretend it does." Before she could respond, a cry pierced the air. Amber had fallen, scraping her knee on the gravel. Hannah immediately stood, but Carter was faster. He reached the girl, scooped her up gently, and sat with her on the edge of the playground, whispering calmly as she cried into his shoulder. Hannah slowed, watching them. Amber usually wanted her when she was hurt, but this time she clung to him, her arms around his neck, her tiny body trembling as he brushed sand off her skin. He checked her wound with surprising care, blowing lightly on the scrape before pulling a bandage from the first aid kit he'd begun carrying in his car, just in case. Hannah felt something twist sharply inside her chest. The way Carter looked at their daughter, the tenderness, the worry, the steadying calm, was so foreign compared to the man he used to be that for a moment she wondered whether she truly knew him at all. When Amber stopped crying, she pressed her face against his collar and whispered something Hannah couldn't hear. Carter smiled softly and kissed the top of her head. He didn't see Hannah watching. Or maybe he did, because when he walked back with Amber in his arms, his eyes met Hannah's with a vulnerability that startled her. "I'll always come when they need me," he said quietly. The sincerity in his voice caused something inside her walls to tremble. She tried to force herself to stand stronger, to maintain distance, but the truth was unbearable. She saw the change in him. It wasn't superficial. It wasn't a show. It wasn't temporary. Later that evening, after Lily was asleep and the girls were tucked into the back seat of Hannah's car, Carter lingered by the open door. The streetlights cast a soft glow on his features, highlighting the exhaustion and hope tangled together in his expression. "Thank you," he murmured, "for letting me be part of today." Hannah swallowed, unable to deny the warmth in her chest. "They, like you." He allowed himself a small, aching smile. "I like them more than anything in my life." She looked away quickly, uneasy with the sincerity in his voice. "You should go. It's getting late." He nodded but didn't move. "Hannah. I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness. Not trust. Not a second chance." He took a breath. "But I'm not leaving again. Not unless you tell me to." For the first time, she didn't immediately shut down the possibility. She didn't tell him no. She didn't walk away. She simply nodded once, a small, fragile gesture that somehow felt monumental. As Carter walked to his car, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. And Hannah stood by her car, watching him leave, her heart betraying her by whispering a truth she wasn't ready to face. He was no longer the man who shouted she didn't deserve his time. He was the man fighting every day to prove she had always deserved far more. Hannah began noticing things she didn't want to notice, small things at first, subtle shifts that quietly chipped away at the distance she had built between herself and Carter. He no longer arrived dressed like a man walking into a boardroom. Instead, he showed up in soft sweaters, rolled-up sleeves, jeans worn enough to look human. He knelt in the dirt without hesitation when the girls wanted to search for worms after rain. He sat cross-legged on the ground during tea parties, drinking imaginary tea with a seriousness that made all three girls squeal with delight. He made mistakes, countless ones, but he never pretended he wasn't learning. And he never once lost his temper. One evening, after almost 2 months of visits, Hannah invited him inside. She didn't plan to. It happened naturally, without conscious thought. It was raining outside, the girls were soaked from jumping in puddles, and Carter stood at the threshold dripping water, carrying Laurel in his arms because she refused to walk after slipping on the wet sidewalk. Hannah watched them for a moment, Carter's worried expression, Laurel's tiny arms looped around his neck, and something in her softened. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," she said, her voice quiet but sure. The warmth of the house wrapped around him as he entered, and he breathed slowly, as if trying not to disturb the fragile piece of the space she had built. He set Laurel down gently, then removed his shoes without being asked, glancing at the family photos on the wall with careful respect. They were simple pictures, birthdays, park days, messy mornings with paint-stained hands, and every single one of them tore at him. They were snapshots of a life he'd missed. As the girls ran to change into dry clothes, Hannah brought towels from the bathroom and handed one to him. He hesitated before taking it, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. The contact was so small, so accidental, yet it sent a warmth rushing through him that frightened her. She turned away quickly, but he saw the way her breath caught in her throat. He helped her dry the girls' hair, making them laugh by messing it up even more before smoothing it carefully. Amber insisted he braid hers, and he attempted it with exaggerated concentration, his brow furrowed so intensely that Hannah had to look away to hide a smile. When the braid came out crooked and lumpy, Amber declared it perfect because Daddy tried his best, and Carter nearly broke right there, swallowing hard as emotion swelled in his chest. Later, after dinner, simple pasta that somehow tasted like a feast because they all shared it, Hannah stepped into the kitchen to wash dishes. Carter followed, almost instinctively, wanting to help. The house was quiet except for the sound of the girls playing in the living room and the whisper of rain against the windows. For the first time in a very long time, it felt like something resembling home. "I don't want to disrupt their lives," Carter said gently as he wiped a plate dry. "If I ever do, tell me. I need to know." Hannah paused, gripping the counter. You haven't disrupted anything. If anything, they look forward to you now. The way he exhaled, soft, relieved, almost reverent, sent a ripple through her chest. Do you? He asked quietly, carefully, as though afraid of the answer. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't turn to him. I don't know, she whispered. It's too much. It's too soon. Too many years have passed. He didn't push. He didn't reach for her. He set the towel aside and leaned on the counter, giving her space, letting her breathe. I'll wait, he said. As long as it takes. Something in the house seemed to shift then, something Hannah couldn't name but felt everywhere, in the air, in her chest, in the warmth radiating from the living room where 3 little girls giggled as they colored on the floor. It was later that night, after he'd read the girls a bedtime story and tucked them in, that the moment became too big to ignore. He lingered in their doorway, watching them sleep, his expression soft and unguarded in a way Hannah had never seen before. When he turned to her, she realized she was staring. You love them, she said quietly, almost involuntarily. He nodded with no hesitation. With everything in me. And you barely know them, she whispered. His voice broke when he answered. I've loved them since the moment I saw them. Maybe before that, without knowing it. The sincerity in his words shook her more than anger, more than fear, more than memory. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to protect herself from the man who had once hurt her and was now becoming someone entirely different. Carter. She began, but he shook his head. You don't have to tell me anything tonight, he said softly. But I need you to know something, and I need to say it carefully so you hear it the right way. She waited, breath caught somewhere between her ribs. I don't want to be part of their lives only on good days or weekends or holidays. I don't want to be someone they visit. I want to be someone they depend on. I want to be there for scraped knees and bad dreams and school plays and messy breakfasts. And I want to be someone you don't have to fight alone anymore. The room fell silent. Hannah's eyes glistened, her walls trembling so visibly it scared her. Carter took one small step closer, but stopped before he touched her. I hurt you, he said quietly. I can't undo that. But I can spend the rest of my life proving I'm not that man anymore. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Go home, Carter, she whispered. Please. He nodded, pain flickering in his eyes but acceptance softening it. I'll see you tomorrow. When he left, Hannah closed the door slowly and pressed her forehead against it, her breath uneven. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't ready to trust him. She wasn't ready to love him again. But for the first time in 5 long years, she wasn't sure she could keep herself from wanting to. Winter was melting slowly into spring when everything finally came to a breaking point, not a breaking that destroyed, but the kind that forces hidden truths into the light and demands a choice. Hannah had grown used to seeing Carter almost every day, used to the way he slipped quietly into their routines, used to the way the girls' laughter doubled whenever he was around. She had grown used to feeling conflicted too, her heart tugging in 2 directions, one pointing toward the past with all its wounds, the other toward a future that terrified her because it offered something she never expected, hope. She tried to keep her guard high, but each day made it harder. Carter showed up not just physically but consistently emotionally present in a way she'd never believed him capable of. He learned the girls' personalities so well that he could calm each one differently. Amber needed humor and distraction, Macy needed gentle reassurance, and Laurel needed quiet honesty. He remembered their favorite snacks, their favorite dresses, their bedtime routines. He knew which stuffed animals they preferred when they were scared, which songs helped them fall asleep, which colors made them smile. He made mistakes, plenty of them, but he always apologized, always tried again, always stayed. It was late Sunday afternoon when Hannah realized that her life had already changed. The four of them were sitting on a picnic blanket in the backyard, the girls picking flowers and trying to braid them into each other's hair. Carter sat beside Hannah, not touching her, not talking too much, just being there. She glanced at him, noticing how peaceful he looked, how natural he seemed in this world she'd built without him. For the first time, she didn't see the man who shouted at her years ago. She saw the man kneeling in the grass now, letting three little girls paint his arms with washable markers while he laughed helplessly. The realization hit her with quiet force: he belonged here, and she didn't know how to deny it anymore. Days later, everything shifted. It was a cold evening, the wind sharp enough to sting, when one of the girls, Macy, spiked a fever. It came out of nowhere. One moment she was drawing on the living room floor, the next she was curled in Hannah's lap, her small body trembling with heat and exhaustion. Panic rushed through Hannah with frightening intensity. She had weathered fevers before, but this one was too high, too sudden, too violent. Her hands shook as she grabbed her car keys, barely aware of her own movements. At that exact moment, Carter knocked on the door. He arrived early, planning to surprise the girls with new crayons and coloring books. When Hannah opened the door, her eyes wide with fear, Macy limp in her arms, he froze. "What happened?" he asked, stepping inside immediately. "She's burning up," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. "She won't stop shaking. I'm taking her to the hospital." "I'm coming with you," Carter said without hesitation. There was no time to argue. Amber and Laurel hurried toward him, frightened by their sister's state. Carter knelt quickly. "Girls, you're going to stay with Mrs. Turner next door, okay? It's just for a little bit. Mama and I are taking Macy to get help." His calmness steadied them. Even Hannah found herself relying on the steadiness in his voice. Within minutes, they were in the car, Hannah holding Macy in the back seat while Carter sped through the quiet streets toward the hospital, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He kept glancing back at them through the mirror, his expression torn between fear and determination. At the emergency room, he remained at Hannah's side the entire time. He helped answer questions when she was too overwhelmed to speak. He held her hand when the doctor inserted an IV into Macy's tiny arm, refusing to let her face the moment alone. He paced the floor when they waited for test results, his worry so strong it made his hands shake, but he stayed. Hours later, the doctor finally returned with reassuring news. It was a viral infection, painful, frightening, but treatable. Macy would recover fully. Relief washed over Hannah so suddenly her knees buckled. Carter caught her before she could fall, holding her firmly, gently, as she buried her face in his chest and allowed herself to cry without restraint. He wrapped his arms around her, murmuring soft words she barely heard but deeply felt. For the first time in 5 years, she let him comfort her. And for the first time, he realized he had never loved her more than he did in that moment. After Macy fell asleep in the hospital bed, Hannah sat beside her, stroking her hair. Carter pulled up a chair and sat across from them, watching both mother and daughter with an intensity that softened into something tender. The room was dim, quiet except for the steady beeping of machines. "Hannah," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence, "I know I can't erase the past. I know I hurt you in ways I'll regret for the rest of my life. But I want to spend every day proving I can be better. Not for me. Not to fix my guilt. For you. For them. For the life we could have if you ever let me fully in." She didn't answer at first. She looked at Macy, her fingers trembling slightly as she brushed a curl from the girl's forehead. Then she looked up at Carter, her blue eyes filled with the weight of years they had lost. "I'm scared," she whispered. He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "So am I. You hurt me." "I know." His expression twisted with remorse. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again." Tears welled in her eyes. For once she didn't try to hide them. "Carter." She inhaled shakily. "I'm not ready for promises. But I'm not ready to walk away from this either." The words washed over him like sunlight breaking through cloud cover. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she placed her hand into his with hesitant certainty, he felt something inside him settle into place. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then we take it one day at a time." Hannah nodded, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Not tears of grief now, tears of release, of relief, of possibility. When morning came, the doctor discharged Macy with medication and instructions. Carter carried her to the car, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. Amber and Laurel ran to them as soon as they reached home, hugging their sister and their mother, and then, unexpectedly, Carter too. Hannah watched everything unfold, her heart twisting in a way that didn't hurt anymore. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't know how long it would take for trust to fully grow back. But she knew one thing with certainty: she wasn't alone anymore. And the girls weren't either. Later that night, after the house grew quiet and the girls slept peacefully in their beds, Carter stood in the doorway, hesitant, as if unsure whether he should say goodnight or stay a moment longer. Hannah walked up to him, soft shadows playing across her face, and looked into his eyes with a vulnerability he hadn't seen since the beginning. "Carter," she said softly. "Yes?" She lifted her hand and touched his cheek, her thumb brushing lightly across his skin. He froze, breath caught, heart pounding. "You deserve a chance too," she whispered. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. When he opened them again, she was smiling, hesitant but real. And for the first time in 5 years, Carter believed in something he'd forgotten existed: a future worth fighting for.